Good evening. I'm Nan. Pardon me. We're here tonight to honor the lives of these young lives, someone's brother, sister, aunt, uncle, daughter, sorry, I'm married, and someone's child. I remember my very first vigil I attended was right here in 2015. I was brought here by my outreach worker from High Point. And it's like Christmas every year because I only see him once a year and it's always here each year. Thank you. And he has a great name, Stephen. Even though I was still in active addiction, I remember hearing a message that I could get my life back if only I surrendered to my disease. I believe a seed was replanted that day. It took a couple more years, but here I am, I stand before you, free from all mind-altering substances today. I believe that I was born with a genetic predisposition to this disease, and there were environmental factors just awaiting the strike of a match, so to speak. I started experimenting with a little weed, a little alcohol, cigarettes, about 12 years old. At age 14, I was severely traumatized by two men. I remember feeling like I was worthless and that I had no value and I hated my life, I hated being me. And when I got into recovery, I started peeling away those layers and realized that grossness followed me throughout my life. And I self-medicated, trying to get away from those feelings. After that happened, that's when I crossed that invisible line that they talk about, trying to numb my feelings. My parents were beside themselves. They didn't know how to help me as parents of a young girl who had been so traumatized. I became so rebellious, so I was out of control. They had to go to the courts and took out a Chin's petition. And I became a ward of the state. I went to a foster home, group homes, and finally to an all-girls residential for almost 2 years. That's where I was first introduced to AA. I was in my first detox at 15, 16 years of age. You know, I stayed sober for a while, but I was miserable. And because I didn't know how to treat my underlying emotional issues. You know, I started drinking again around 19 years old, and I was a blackout drinker and made a complete mess out of myself when I drank and embarrassed my family. And I was then introduced to cocaine, and I used it throughout my mid-80s to the early 90s. I entered the Fellowship of Recovery in the Quincy area in 1993, and I started rebuilding my life. I got divorced in early recovery back then, and I had 3 young children at the time. I started my own business, painting and wallpapering, and we had a beautiful home and many material things, you know. Get with me, please. Money started becoming more important than my meeting attendance as I earned more and more of it. I was allowing the gifts I got from recovery edge me away from my meetings. I remember hearing someone from the podium telling this story about his addiction to heroin, and I didn't want to hear it. I put blinders on and blocked my ears, and I said to the man next to me, "Oh, I can't stand hearing about that." Ugh, I was literally cringing, and I was comparing and not identifying with the speaker. Because after all, a drug is a drug is a drug, and alcohol is a drug as well. The man next to me said, "That's a yet." I exclaimed, "Oh no, not me, I know me well. I'll never do that." You know, I wish I had just been more open-minded to listen and not make such judgment. Around my 7th or 8th year of recovery, I ended up having a life-saving operation. And I was sent home with an endless supply of OxyContin. And then the oxycodone came along, and fentanyl patches, and where to follow. I became completely addicted within months of taking the OxyContin. Eventually, I needed more and more, and there was never enough. About 1.5 years into my relapse, I call it, I eventually turned into a heroin. It turned into a heroin addiction. I became unrecognizable to everyone and even to myself. My relapse lasted 17 years and 11 months. That's how long they prescribed them, and I was quite the actress. And I own that, you know. I had multiple overdoses, psych wards, detoxes. My life was a complete utter mess, disaster, and I didn't know how to get out of the darkness, or the bowels of hell, as I call it. the last year out there in active addiction. My son Stevie had gone to jail as a direct result of his addiction. My mother had passed away from brain cancer in February 2017, and I remember feeling like I had nobody left to save me if I needed, or if I got in a jam. My disease had alienated me from all my friends and family. I was alone for the first time in my life, just utterly alone. You see, my mother never gave up on me. She brought me to detoxes, meetings, etc. She was my lifeline, and I was completely and utterly alone. At this point, I was resolved to the fact that I would just be in active addiction for the rest of my life. I felt I had no options. I just died that way, period. By Thanksgiving of 2017, my oldest child had relapsed and got a call from St. Elizabeth's. I arrived at the hospital. A team of doctors surrounded me and said, "Most people don't survive this unless her youth will help her." You see, she had become septic after relapse, and she had become septic throughout her whole system. 2 collapsed lungs, pneumonia, burst in her right leg. She was on life support in a coma, and they had to medically paralyze her. I remember kneeling next to that ICU bed, begging God to save her. I asked God, help me get out of my addiction, but I didn't know how to. Please, God, please help me, I said. About a week or so later, God answered my prayer. God has jokes. My sister, who worked at the Brockton Police Department, found my drugs. And I screamed at her, this isn't funny, "Give them back. You don't understand, I need them." And I guess I terrified her. Later she said, that was the first time I had really heard myself admit out loud that I was powerless and needed help. I promised my sister that I'd get help as soon as my daughter gets better. And thank God she did. And during this time, my sister would check the police log each day to see if they had taken my body out of my apartment. I was so self-centered, I didn't think anybody cared, like I said earlier. We think that we don't affect the ones who love us most, but we do. On January 4th of 2018, I overdosed in my apartment, and it was different this time. It scared the hell out of me. I started detoxing at home for about 4 days, and it was agonizing hell. My sister came by my apartment and found me in bad shape, and she gave me options. I'll section you, either you go willingly or I'm going to section you. I agreed to go to treatment, so she brought me to the Brockton PD, in which they contacted the Champion Plan. Through them, I went to detox, and I extended my stay at detox and went to further treatment. When I got home, I started planning my days around a meeting. I told people I was new. I got a routine of meetings down. I knew where I was going each day. I got a sponsor, joined a group, got involved in the literature meetings. I built up my foundation ever since I left detox in 2018. I have an enormous support system of men and women, young and old, in both fellowships today. My life has completely turned around. I actually worked in the recovery field, left last year, and I partook in the Recovery Coach Academy also last year. I got married 3 years ago to a man I met in the halls in recovery in 1994, my sweetheart. I actually had the honor of presenting my husband with his 30-year medallion in May of this year. This time around, my life revolves around my recovery. I'm nervous, sorry. I have many gifts of recovery, but I keep it up front to remember to not allow those gifts of recovery to take me away from my recovery again. So I stay very close and connected. We own my husband and I own a small business, and I have so much gratitude for everything that my higher power has bestowed upon us. And I don't take it for granted today. Nothing. I don't take anything for granted. I really do have a blessed life. My beautiful life, as I knew it, was abruptly changed on March 22nd, 23, when we got a call from the hospital that my 38-year-old son Stevie was in rough shape, and they said we had to get there. I arrived there and was greeted by 2 social workers, a doctor, and security nearby. We were taken into a private room where I heard the most devastating words. "I'm sorry, but we couldn't save him." I still don't remember everything as my brain and body just froze. His father was in tears. We were brought to the trauma unit to see my beautiful son. Stevie. And he still had the tube from the intubation in his mouth. His beautiful blue eyes were slightly open. My Stevie was gone. I guess I fell on the floor off the chair, and I don't even remember it, and his father had to lift me. You see, Stevie had struggled with addiction, substance use disorder for years. He also had bipolar disorder and PTSD. Mental health issues run hand in hand alongside with this disease of addiction. As I had mentioned earlier, he had been incarcerated in late 2016 as a direct result of his addiction. While incarcerated, he stayed clean for over 3.5 years. He became a recognized Buddhist. He studied Buddhism for over 3 years. He was so healthy and happy. I'd visit him like clockwork every Monday. He and I shared so much together, so much healing. We spoke about recovery. We had so much laughter. It was so fun. Oh, that laughter, those jokes and everything keeps me stable most days when I remember it all. My goodness, he was so funny, and we shared some tears. Then the pandemic came. I wasn't able to visit, barely any phone calls or emails or anything. All these men were so cut off to the world. He was in a single cell and 23 hours a day, and that was for 9 months, and it's like inhumane. And then they started offering methadone or Suboxone. And I told him, I warned him, don't take that methadone, no good can come from it. You've been clean all this time. No H&Is, no outside groups going in, no recovery. And if you're in recovery, you know that you need to hear the message always, you know. He got off the methadone a few weeks before being released to a program in May of 22. He went to a halfway house and different sober houses. He had some struggles adjusting to life outside. He was eventually prescribed medically assisted treatment, Suboxone. He was going to meetings and working, and he was doing so well. He was so happy and proud of himself. And I finally felt a sense of relief that he's gonna be okay. He's got it this time. I could finally breathe again. I could finally sleep at night. In March of this year, he decided to come off the Suboxone. And he went to detox to come off of them. He felt that people were judging him, saying you're not clean and sober if you're on that. He got out of detox on March 21st, and we spoke for about an hour that evening, and he said he was in Boston, felt he had a better chance to find the resources to get into another halfway house, as the detox couldn't find any. The pandemic affected funding for these programs, and they were literally cut in half as far as availability. Also, a lot of programs closed completely. We said our I love yous and good night, and he said that he'd call me in the morning. Stevie called me as promised at 6:40 a.m. the next morning. He told me how he didn't feel well and proceeded to tell me about the plans he had for the day. I said, keep me posted, and if you need anything, need any help with it, just call me. Thanks, Ma, I will. I said to him, no matter what, Stevie, don't pick up. I know, Ma, I won't. I love you, Ma. I love you too, sweetheart, I said. 2 hours after we hung up the phone, they pronounced him deceased at 8:44 a.m. My incredibly amazing, blessed life as I once knew was completely shattered. The truly happy, grateful, and excited to seize the day kind of woman is no longer, and I don't know if she'll ever return. My heart has been crushed, and I'm so exhausted from my emotions. 5 stages of grief they talk about, I cycle through them each day. I'm not okay. I put on a mask, my brave face, I call it each day, shower and go to work. The visions of his beautiful face, how great he was, and how very cold his face was. As I kissed him, it's embedded in my mind's eye forever. I remember smelling, sorry. I remember smelling my son for that last time. That scent of a child only a mother can identify with. All that it can do is smell his t-shirts and clothing now. This disease makes us think we aren't loved or lovable. It wants us isolated and alone so it can talk negatively to us constantly and make us crave more. More is never enough. It tells us just a little more and we'll be okay. You'll feel a little better. It's a lie. When you lose a child from this disease as a parent, I experience the guilt of wondering if I did enough. I get the should-haves, could-haves, would-haves, you know. Physically it affects me. People don't know what to say to us. You know, sometimes they just avoid us. Because I don't blame them. What do you say to a mother? What helps us is you wanting to just hang out or send me a heart emoji or a prayer emoji. I feel so confident just knowing that somebody's thinking of me. Like, that just brings me so much joy. Sometimes the best thing is not saying anything at all and just offering a hug. I so understand the awkward silence, I do. I know it's difficult for others to see me in this position, and I acknowledge that. I see you, I hear you without you saying anything at all, and I appreciate that. I want to hear Stevie's name. I want to hear all the wonderful stories about him. I want to hear the funny ones especially, because it makes my day go by a little easier. Every conversation, I can't help but interject Stevie's name into it. Please try to understand it's part of this process of grief, they say. Please allow me to just have a voice, lend an ear. I'm not asking anyone to fix me. I'm unfixable. To know the true Stevie, who is much more than the ink on his arrest sheet. He had a brilliant mind. He had this huge thirst for knowledge, and we had this running joke about his running tab at Barnes & Noble. At age 17, he enrolled himself in college. He had a huge heart, and it was handsomer as his face was. He was a loyal friend, a protector of others, and especially for the less fortunate. He was actually quite humble. A great thinker, quite philosophical really, an inventor, my goodness. I have notebooks and letters of all kinds of ideas and brilliance and numbers and figures, and I don't know anything about that stuff. But he was amazing. And I remember my sister Caroline, when she had cancer, he had prayed, and these are his beads, his mantras. He would pray mantras for 1 or 2 full days for her to beat that cancer. And she did, thank you, God. He was hysterically comedic and quick-witted. To know my relationship with my son was to witness the most beautiful love and friendship between a mom and her son. He called me every day, emails, texts, cards, and letters. Honestly, we were the best of friends. So many of his friends have expressed how much love he had for me and how proud he was of me in my recovery. And he was like one of my biggest supporters. He cheered me on. In closing, I stand here sharing my experience, strength, and hopefully some hope that no matter what, I don't have to pick up over anything that life throws at me, and you don't either. I attribute that to building a strong foundation and relationship with my higher power from early on in my recovery. I never wanted to be on this side of the microphone speaking about the loss of my child, but here I am, and as uncomfortable as it is, oh well, I say. Because my silence won't help anyone. We must recover out loud. We must speak louder about our painful losses. Because by myself I can't, but together we can bring more awareness to this disease of addiction and to this overdose epidemic. No matter what, don't pick up. Thank you.